Let's bring you this now. Adequate correctional centre staffing plays quite a pivotal role in ensuring the safety and security of inmates. However, overcrowding remains a major problem in the country. There are over 150,000 inmates in the country, while the prison capacity is just over 100,000. Overcrowding was one of the reasons given for opening private prisons in the country. But these prisons have suffered torture and abuse scandals. And now, the Thabo Bester saga that we're all witnessing before our eyes. So let's discuss this now with Bafana Khumalo from Sonke Gender Justice, who joins me this morning to take this conversation forward. And thank you so much, Bafana, for your time. Good morning to you. I mean, how much of a problem and a contributor to what we're even seeing now with the Thabo Bester saga is overcrowding and inadequate staffing when it comes to our prisons?
Good morning to you and your viewers. The issue of overcrowding in prisons is a major problem, as we all know. But I think the Thabo Bester story introduces another dynamic because, as we all know, he was not in a public prison. He was in a private prison where there are clearer protocols around numbers of staff, professional conduct, and security technology that is meant to be part of this prison system. And these private prisons, as you know, are meant to be a model that we can use in terms of how we can improve our public prisons. So I think the Thabo Bester story introduces a very interesting dynamic because I don't think it's just about staff or lack of staff that could have contributed to what we have seen. It's clear that Thabo Bester had lots of connections higher up in the system and was well connected. Yeah, no doubt.
I think that's also, the assumption, I think, coming from everyone. Everyone is asking themselves, how could this have happened when, especially, as you've mentioned, Bafana, I mean, in a private cell, I can imagine in a public prison as well, surely there are cameras, CCTV footage, wardens who are on the ground monitoring prison movement. How could this escape have been such a successful escape for Thabo Bester? Because the Correctional Services has confirmed that the body or the remains found in the cell do not belong to him. Where were the wardens when it comes to capacity? Where was the staff at the moment? Does that lead to, the connections that you just alluded to earlier, that perhaps this is more of a high-level escape than we could imagine?
I think there's much more to this story than what the authorities are leading us to believe at the moment. I mean, it's unfathomable how a prison where an inmate is supposed to be in a single cell, somebody could burn to ashes. I mean, it's really unbelievable, where you should be having security cameras, you should be having prison guards that are there 24/7. How was it even possible that a dead body, as we now know, that this is not somebody that burnt alive? This is somebody that was placed in that ward, in that cell when he had already died. And who is this person? But more astounding, why has it taken the Department of Corrections a whole year to come up forward with this information when they have known that this is actually not the person that was meant to be in that cell? So there's lots of questions in this story that really don't give us confidence about the work of the authorities. And as I indicate, it can only point to the fact that this man clearly had connections higher up and had access to resources and was aided and abetted by many, not just the prison staff.
But when it comes to lawlessness in prisons, what does the saga tell you? Because for the mere fact that we have a department named Correctional Services, the Department of Correctional Services, that we have these prisons that are deemed to be corrective measures put in place to rehabilitate, convicts, so that in future they may perhaps be, reintroduced back into society. Yet we witness lawlessness not only in a sense of Thabo Bester escaping from prison, but conducting business from, behind prison cells. What does that tell you about what really goes on behind these prison cells?
I think we really are facing a serious challenge. I mean, talking to a criminologist last week who indicated that, in fact, there are many stories of people that we think are in prison and are actually either helped to get out of prison to go and commit crimes and then taken back to prison. So it shows that, there are lots of weaknesses in our prison system. We may be thinking that people are behind bars, and in fact, people are actually living a comfortable life. The fact that this man could even pull off a launch of a so-called company from prison, having access to a laptop, having access to contrabands, having access to Wi-Fi, and having access to money to even pay staff, that are supposed to be running his so-called company. I mean, this is really, really massive failures in our criminal justice system. Yeah. But I think more important for me is, let's not forget that that man was in prison because he had committed serial rapes, that he had murdered people. Now, you can imagine for women that have been exposed to his heinous crimes, what happens to you when somebody that you thought was safe and locked behind bars, and you hear actually he's been living out for a whole year. I mean, really, it's a failure by government that has always committed to be serious about gender-based violence.
Mm-hmm. What's the expectation from G4S? Our correspondent out in the UK telling us that the British company G4S out in London did not want to comment much, redirecting most of, journalists to a PR agency based in South Africa to provide more of the communication with the country and to, I suppose, represent them in giving some sort of explanation. This over and above them, defying what the Department of Correctional Services is saying. The DC is saying it is not Thabo Bester whose remains were in that cell. G4S saying it was Thabo Bester. Now, this is a private security company. What's your response and reaction to how they've reacted to these developments? And also, what's your expectation from them, in a sense? Because I think an example needs to be sent here for other privately owned facilities in the country.
Well, I think, Tumelo, this is really disappointing, and perhaps it's even a wakening call to us as South Africans, because there's always this narrative that is sold that in order to resolve some of our challenges of capacity in government or in the state, let's privatize. And here's one good example where privatization has failed dismally. And the very fact that, as I've indicated, this story had to involve a media house to break the fact that a prisoner had escaped, and there was lots of denial from both the company and the Department of Corrections, indicates that this is not necessarily the solution. Because it means they've spent a whole year actually trying to cover up this story. And what else is happening in that prison that we are not aware of? Right. If this is what Thabo Bester was doing, which other prisoner who has access to means and connections would be having these kinds of shenanigans inside the prison? And this calls to question about whether we are paying value for money in this contract with this private prison. And I have made a suggestion that there needs to be an independent investigation on this. I don't see how police and the company or even Department of Corrections should be the ones who investigate themselves, in a sense, because they failed us. And that means we should also be investigating other private prisons so that we ensure that indeed they meet the standards that which we are paying them for.